In this screen capture video, I'm going to talk about how you can create frequency tables with using Excel. So at this point, you should have your online survey downloaded into Excel and saved, and you should have a data table. All that was explained in a previous screen capture video about preparing your data for analysis. Your Excel file should look something like this, where you have this striped pattern which indicates that it's a data table. And whenever you click anywhere in the data table, it should say Table Tools at the top. You can click on that Table Tools to go back to the Table Tools menu, and you should see that the data is called Data. If it's called something else, you can rename it. And right now I'm going to show you how to use the pivot table feature to create a frequency table. So the first thing, again, is to click on Table Tools, and you should see a button called Summarize with Pivot Table. If I click on that, there's a Create Pivot Table dialog box. I just press OK. It's going to create this pivot table based on my data, and it's going to create a new worksheet within this spreadsheet. You note that it just called it Sheet 3. It might call it Sheet 2 or whatever. It doesn't really matter. Sheet 1, if we go back there, is where the data is. So it didn't disappear, but it's all in the same spreadsheet. If you want, you can, for organizational purposes, you can relabel Sheet 1 by double-clicking on it. I can call that Data. And Sheet 3, you can call this the Frequency 1. You're not going to turn in this file, though. This is only for your own organization. You know, these spreadsheets can also be changed around the order of them. If I go back to Frequency 1, there's this big blank box here. If I click on that, it takes me back to the pivot table feature, and I see a pivot table field list where all my variables are listed with checkboxes next to them, and then underneath that there are these 4 boxes, and it says drag fields between areas below. So the idea with the pivot table feature is really versatile, and you can use it to create all kinds of tables and charts. But here I'm just going to show you how to use it to create a frequency table, basically just telling you the number of people who answered question in a certain way and the percentage of those people who answered the question in a certain way. We're going to do it for the major, for the key opinion variable, which in this example is minor crimes. If you remember from the previous video, the minor crimes question was asking, for the following statements, state whether you strongly agree, somewhat disagree, or strongly disagree. If police officers concentrated on minor crimes, they could prevent bigger crimes from happening. And people answered one of those 4 categories. The first thing I want to do is I want to locate my one of the key opinion question, and if you just check on the box, it will put it into automatically into the row labels. But what I want you to do is to take it and grab it with your mouse and drop it in the values box, and then it should say count of minor crimes, so it doesn't show up completely. And we have the beginnings of a table here. It shows us there's 29 people who answered that question. What that means is there were a few people who didn't answer. If we go back to the data sheet, if you look at the bottom row of your data, there's 32, which means there's actually 31 people who answered this survey, because the first row is devoted to the variable names. So we had 31 people answer the survey, but 29 people answered this question, so 2 must have skipped it. That's just useful to keep in mind. The second thing you want to do is to grab that same variable, minor crimes, and drop it in the row labels. So again, just to highlight this again, first thing you do is you grab the variable, find the main variable that you're going to do the frequency table of, and it should be one of your key opinion questions. drop it in the values box, and then you grab it and drop it in the row labels. And you end up with something that's starting to look like a table. Not completely, but it's still a little bit in disarray. But we can see here that 12 people said somewhat agree, 11 said somewhat disagree, 3 strongly agree, and 3 strongly agree, and 3 strongly disagree. And then there's a blank which indicates no answer. So the first thing we want to do after this is we want to get rid of those blanks and get rid of any of those missing values. Okay, and to do that I can click on this drop down menu and check off the blank, any meaningless responses, to get rid of them, and then they're gone. Now it shows this little filter icon that shows that you've filtered the data. The other thing to note is that Excel put this in alphabetical order. These categories are sorted in alphabetical order, but we want them to be sorted in logical order according to agree, disagree. So we want it to go from, say, strongly agree, and then on down to strongly disagree. But strongly agree is down here. That's easily changed. I can click on strongly agree, right click, and then click move, and in this case I'm going to move it to the beginning. Now they're in a good logical order: strongly agree, somewhat agree, etc. So you want to get the categories into a logical order, where the agrees and disagrees are lined up. The strongly disagrees and strongly agree on opposite ends. Now the next thing to note is that we have a small number of people who answered this survey, 29, and there's only 3 people who said strongly agree or strongly disagree. It's common when you ask a like or type question like this that if you have answers in the middle, people tend to hedge their opinions a little bit by answering in the middle rather than at the extreme, especially if they're not necessarily certain of what their answer would be. So the problem with this for our purposes is that when you have a very small number of people in a category, it's not very reliable, for the same reason that if you flip a coin 6 times, even though we expect that you're going to get 3 heads and 3 tails, it's really easy to get 4 heads and 2 tails, or 4 tails and 2 heads. In other words, even though when we're flipping a coin, we know what the theoretical probability that we're really supposed to get half and half, when we have a small number of coin flips, the actual percentage of time that the coin is heads or tails can easily deviate from that theoretical percentage. It might not be 50%, it could be 60-70% easily. If you flip the coin only twice, you can easily get 2 heads in a row. That doesn't mean that it's a coin that will 100% of the time flip to heads. Same reason here, if you have a small number of cases in the categories, as we will when we have a small number of people in our survey overall, that means that the reliability is low. So what we want to do is combine these categories, and I advise you combining the disagree and agree categories, and this is easy to do in Excel. You can highlight the 2 disagree categories, right click, and then group, and it creates a separate column here and calls it group 1, and I'm going to relabel that by just writing over it disagree. And then I can do the same thing with these. I can highlight the strongly agree and somewhat agree, right click and group, and it labels it group 2, and I can just write over that agree. Now we've grouped these, but the old categories are still there. In order to get rid of them, if you're clicking anywhere on this table here, note that if I click outside that panel, it disappears, but if I click back on it, on the table, the panel reappears, and you note as soon as I grouped these categories, it created a second variable called minor crimes 2. That's actually now the variable we're going to use. The minor crimes 2 is the one with agree or disagree collapsed. It's just the two categories. So to get rid of these more specific categories, I can just take minor crimes here and I can remove it. Okay, and if I just undo to show you that again, I can take minor crimes and remove it, or I can take minor crimes here and grab it and drag it up like that, and it goes away. So now you can see that it's collapsed the categories. So 15 people are in the agreement and 14 are in the disagreement. Now we have the beginnings of a table. What we're missing is percentages. In order to get that, I'm going to take minor crimes 2, or whatever your key independent variable is. I'm going to grab it and drop it in the values box again. We start out with two columns looking almost exactly the same. We can easily change one of them to be percentages. In this case, I click anywhere in this column, I right click, and I go to show values as percentage of column total. It's important that it's percentage of column total. And now it gives me the percentage of people in each category. We don't want those extra decimal places, so I can highlight them and click on the percentage icon up here. You can also use the decrease decimal option. And now we have the beginnings of a table that we can now grab and copy into Microsoft Word and then change the format around a little bit to make it a little bit easier to read and to make it descriptive. So what I would do is I can grab this table, Control C to copy it, Control V to paste it into Word, and now I start to change it around a little bit to make it more descriptive and more self-explanatory. I would get rid of this first row. You can always right click on the row, delete cells, and delete that entire row. Delete minor crimes 2. I can just call this total. The other thing is a useful feature to line these up a little bit and make it easier to read is to highlight the whole thing, whole table, right click, select auto fit and auto fit to contents. That makes it a lot smaller and more manageable table. And the next thing then is to put it in the right font. If I choose the Calibre font, whatever the font is in my table, and 12 points, and then I need to give it a title, and the title should be very descriptive. Titles should make the table really self-explanatory. So this is a table 1 frequency distribution of agreement with the statement, and then I'm going to enter in the statement that was in the survey. If police officers concentrated on minor crimes, they could prevent bigger crimes from happening. And I want to make sure that's in the right format and the right size. And once I've done that, lined up the table a little bit, then I can save this file somewhere safe and move on and create the next frequency distribution for the second key opinion question. Remember, you're not going to turn this in yet, but when you get to the results section, these tables will be used in the results and you'll be interpreting what you found.